I guess you know what's coming today. Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister of Great Britain, is showing his undeterred presence at the party conference in Manchester despite his party's current poor poll numbers. Although he only took over as Prime Minister about a year ago, he would probably have been dethroned again in an early election. The vultures are already hovering over Sunak, is what the Guardian newspaper headlined about this. Sunak, meanwhile, continues to try to convince the public that the Tories have a clear and rigorous plan to stay in power. However, his less loyal party colleagues have their own ideas about this. With elections due next year, the British Prime Minister has been counting on his fractious party to follow his course amid fears of electoral defeat. Rishi Sunak indeed has a monumental task ahead of him. When Britain's Prime Minister entered the large conference hall at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester on Wednesday afternoon, he had to turn a lot of things around. Sunak has been in office for around a year, as I said, and both his poll numbers and those of his party could hardly be worse. If a general election were to take place soon, the Tories would likely suffer a devastating defeat. It's not just the Tories' reputation that has been damaged. Sunak also needs to get away from the image of the ex-banker and technology geek who, because of his wealth, mostly through marriage, does not understand how ordinary people in the country are doing. And so, after an introduction from his wife, he started with a story about his parents, a family doctor and a pharmacist, who have worked their way up in the coastal town of Southampton. Stories about hard-working climbers are always well received by the Tories. Sunak touted Britain's security role in Europe and said he is proud of the country's leadership in supporting Ukraine. Such appeals to the continued relevance of the former world power also sell themselves in conservative circles well. But then Sunak immediately drifted into party politics and he became, compartmentalized. Didn't Labour Party leader Keir Starmer previously support his predecessor, the left-wing NATO critic Jeremy Corbyn? Well, Sunak already looks like a party leader on the defensive there. And the people of the country are right, as Sunak explains, if they feel let down by politics, because politics doesn't work the way it should. Why is that? For 30 years, there has been a status quo in politics in which short-term interests take precedence over long-term goals. Our mission is to fundamentally change the country. But weren't the Tories, Sunak's party, in power for the last 13 of these 30 years? Sunak explained that his goal is to make long-term decisions for a brighter future, and first of all, praised the drastic withdrawal of his country's climate goals that he recently announced. Sunak then assured his listeners that Britain will still achieve the country's goal of becoming climate neutral by 2050, which was set out in law under Theresa May. But he doesn't reveal how this will be achieved. It's also questionable whether this environmental policy shift to the right will indeed help him with voters. According to surveys, there are still significantly more supporters than opponents when it comes to climate neutrality in Great Britain, even among Tory voters. And reports about a possible cancellation of the planned section from Birmingham to Manchester have been circulating in the British media since the weekend. And Sunak has been putting off the issue for just as long. He was asked about this dozens of times in interviews and he never gave a clear answer. In doing so, he did himself and his party a disservice, though. The issue of HS2 hung over the party conference like a bad omen. And then, in his speech, there was certainty. Sunak explained that there has been a false consensus on infrastructure issues for too long, saying that large cities need to be connected to each other. And the most important thing is always London, he adds. What the north of England needs above all, however, would be better connections between the cities there. HS2 is the ultimate example of the old consensus, Sunak says. He is therefore cancelling the planned section to Manchester. The money saved, that's £36 billion, will instead flow into hundreds of new projects in the north. And for this he got big cheers in the hall. And in fact, the HS2 project has had an air of standstill and waste for years. It was launched in 2009 by the Labour government of then Prime Minister Gordon Brown. At that time, Great Britain's high-speed train network was limited to the just 109-kilometre route from London's St Pancras station to the Eurotunnel. And nothing has changed to this day. Just a little comparison. Spain currently has a 3,487-kilometre long high-speed train network. In France, there are 2,734 kilometres, and in Germany, at least 1,517 kilometres. When the Conservative David Cameron took over as Prime Minister from Brown after his election victory in 2010, he stuck to the project. After public consultations, his Conservative-led government proposed a route in the shape of a Y. The HS2 route network should initially be expanded from London to Birmingham and fork there. The northwestern part should continue to Manchester. The northeastern part should end in Leeds. From a connection near Manchester, some of the high-speed trains would continue to Scotland via the existing rail network. When the project started in 2012, it was reported to cost £32 billion. The first work on the section between London and Birmingham began in 2017, with construction work officially starting in 2020. This work is currently in full swing. HS2 is currently the largest infrastructure project under construction in Europe. In 2020, the estimated costs rose to over £100 billion, and critics argued that this money should instead be used to expand the patchy and outdated train network in northern England. Proponents said that moving long-distance trains onto the HS2 network could create additional capacity on existing routes in the north, though. Since Sunak has now deleted the section between Birmingham and Manchester, this option is now no longer possible. After numerous delays and increasingly escalating costs, Boris Johnson's government cancelled the planned section between Birmingham and Leeds in November 2021. The north is now left completely empty-handed when it comes to HS2. Despite the promised regional infrastructure projects, Sunak's decision is unlikely to go down well in northern England. Isn't there the Red Wall? On Tuesday evening, 30 companies and organizations in the region, including the Manchester United Football Club, warned Sunak in a letter that he was committing a massive act of economic self-sabotage by cancelling the section to Manchester. Well, the Tories are used to this self-sabotage in the economy. And the anger is understandable. For decades, people in northern England have had to watch as they are regularly promised infrastructure projects that are subsequently never or only partially implemented. And so to this day, it is often a pain to travel between different parts of northern England using public transport. Even without the controversial announcement regarding HS2, the party conference, which began on Sunday, was not under good auspices. At a noticeable number of events, the majority of seats remained empty. Many Conservative MPs stayed away from the party conference. The public's trust in the Tories' economic competence has been lost at least since the short and farcical term in office of Liz Truss. Labour was recently miles ahead of the Tories in all election polls. Until Sunak's final speech, only one Conservative politician had shown any noticeable interest. It was, of all people, Liz Truss. She spoke at a side event at the party conference on Monday. Hundreds of listeners crowded into the small hall to hear her speak. Truss showed no regrets for her chaotic term in office and once again spoke out in favour of radical tax cuts. She never learns. And right-wing populist Nigel Farage, among others, was in the audience. The co-founder of the EU-critical UK Independence Party, UKIP, which has now largely disappeared from the scene, took part in the conference as a representative of the right-wing news channel GB News. Farage was seen mingling with delegates and taking selfies with scores of visitors. At a party on the sidelines of the party conference, Farage could be seen conquering the dance floor with former Conservative Home Secretary Priti Patel. I'm glad I haven't seen a picture of that one. Farage noted favourably in an interview that the Conservative Party was always moving towards his positions. Asked whether he would consider joining the party, he told a BBC reporter that he might consider it if it becomes a truly conservative party. When asked whether he could imagine Nigel Farage in his party, Rishi Sunak did not rule out the possibility. But what Farage means with conservative is not conservative. A coalition between the Tories and Nigel Farage would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. But since Boris Johnson's term in office, the party has moved increasingly to the right. This process has intensified under Sunak. This also became clear at the party conference. In their speeches, leading Conservative politicians railed against an alleged meat ban that could exist under Labour. A minister spoke out against political speed limits in road traffic. Other speakers warned that governments could dictate where and how often their citizens can shop. All talking points that only exist in right-wing populist corner of social media. Because nobody's really thinking about that. The Tories' shift to the right is apparently not well received by the British public, though. The polling institute Savanta recently asked 2,000 Brits what word they could think of about Rishi Sunak's party. And it was nothing nice, and I will not name it here on this channel, to be honest, what those people said. No, not the majority, but several. Yeah, but to get back to Farage for 1 second, what Farage imagines as conservative is the same thing the German AfD is considering as conservative. No, that is not conservative, what you mean and what you explain there. That is right-wing extremist populist. Conservative has nothing to do with that. And I know what I'm talking about. And if you want to see another topic right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. Right with your chance to subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so, or to visit my newest channel, which is doing really well at the moment. It's still in its baby shoes and already got 50,000 views and more already. So I'm really happy about that one, which is kind of more my hobby because of the game, but it's just fun. And it's really great that it started that well. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be there.